that gets you there. All right.
Sorry, quick question. Is it worth if we done ourselves in Rhino to pull it over to Maya and use post-production?
If you're animating stuff other than a camera path, it has to be done in Maya. So, like, because Rhino, you can't take your geometry and make it into something else without modeling it, and there's no, I don't know, do you know if there's like a time slider or anything so you can actually like render out a whole bunch of different sequences? Yeah, I mean, sure, I don't know the plugin. Maya is available to all of you guys and it's meant for that, but you can bring geometry in. You're gonna have to be clever with it though, like animation is often done with meshes. I'm going to show a lot of NURB stuff today, but what happens, especially with blend shapes, one of the first things we'll talk about is when you're blending between two objects, the objects have to be topologically similar. So you can't take like a mesh of a house that you guys have designed and a circle or a sphere and just make them the same thing. But if you had a mesh and you started with a sphere and you never changed the face count and you modeled the house out of that, which is super easy, and actually how you do mesh modeling is just out of a simple primitive, then you absolutely can blend shape between the two of them. If you don't blend shape though, there's other options. You just have to get clever with it. You can take in your NURB surfaces and look at options with scaling 1D or scaling 2D, scaling 3D, depending on what you want to do, how you want to do it. So there is ways to import meshes. Just a reminder, if you're moving from Rhino into Maya, meshes you import as an OBJ. If you're using NURB surfaces, you import NURBs as IGS. So when you're exporting out of Rhino, you export an IGS and you import IGS into Maya. So, pardon? I think I did press record. Didn't I? Yeah. All right, so in animation, like the main thing is keyframing. Super simple, super simple. I mean, like, without going through all of the interface again, you have your time slider down here. This is kind of the bread and butter for doing an animation. If you want to change the number of frames, you just, whatever. Change that up to 200. Great, you have 200. You can kind of change the scale at which you're looking at it. So when you're storyboarding out, you want to storyboard your animation just like everything else. Say you're doing a sun path study. Maybe you want the sun to start where you can't really see anything, like early morning, and then it's going to take a 180-degree path over top. You probably want to do like 180 frames, or at least that's the easiest way to kind of keyframe that. But we'll get more into that as we move along. So let's just start super simple, and I'll show you guys what keyframing does. All right, so we've got a box. Great. This box, you can do all the same stuff, manipulate it, whatever. But all you have to do to set a keyframe, you move the time slider to where you want it to be, what frame you want to operate at. You select your geometry, and then the hotkey is you just hit S. And if you see here, a little red line showed up right here. So, okay, now it knows that at frame 1, the geometry wants to be in this position. If you want to keyframe it, say we want it to rotate around 360 degrees, over 360 frames, so 1 degree a frame. Then we'll just go, we'll make our time slider, our animation, 360 frames. So there's this little area down here. This controls how many frames you want the animation to be. You enter that, hit enter, our animation's 360 frames. Now what you do, and this sequence is very important in keyframing, you move the time slider to the frame that you want to be dealing with first. So we'll say 90. Then we will rotate our box, and we'll say we'll rotate it 90 degrees in that direction, and we'll rotate it -90 in this direction. Okay, so now we've got our geometry. It's being transformed a little bit. It's selected. Our time slider is where we want. We just hit S again. This little red dot, or little red strike shows up. Great. Now if we scrub through here, our geometry is simply moving. Super simple. Like super simple. So now we want to add more transformations. Okay, that's doing something we like, whatever, it's working with our geometry. We'll move up to 180 frames, and we'll just change this to 180, and 180, No, that didn't change it. Okay, geometry selected. Our time slider is at 180 degrees, or at 180 frames. We hit S again. Our key shows up. Great. We'll move up to 270. Now, obviously, it's not always going to be even increments like this. That's where part of like kind of designing the animation comes into play. You're going to want, you know, like, it doesn't have to always be a smooth rotation. I'm doing a super simple demonstration of a 360 degree rotation around 2 axis over 360 frames. It makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't have to be that. You can have this happen over 5 frames. You could have this happen over 50,000 frames. You know, like, it's totally up to you guys. And then if we want this thing to loop, so it just keeps playing over and over and over, all we'll do is we'll bring the geometry back. But we don't want to bring it right back to 0, because what that will not always happen, but can happen depending on the geometry you're working with, is it'll skip. It's kind of trying to understand a consistent rotation. So we'll just make this same kind of logic that we've been going with, 360 degrees, negative 360 and 360, and we'll just keyframe that again. So if we scrub through, we can see our thing is animated. And then if you want to see how, like, this is going to be really fast, and this is actually a good point to talk about after, but this little button right here, this will play your animation. No, it's not that fast. But you can see you have a 360 frame animation, and it's going to just keep cycling over so you can actually understand and see what's going on. Also, another thing to consider when you are operating with, or when you're setting up and you're trying to figure out how many frames you want it to be, think about how long you want the animation to be. Like, how much of the presentation is it taking up? What frequency do you want stuff happening at? Because you can control that in here. You can control that in post-production as well by actually extending out the frames. But say you render an animation and you were to animate this at 180 frames instead of 360. It'll start jumping a little bit more. But also, if you render at 180 frames instead of 360 frames, you have half the amount of rendering, and then you have half the amount of time you're waiting for it. So that is a productive thing and something to consider at the beginning. You guys all know how to bring in image sequences into Photoshop or into QuickTime and make movies, right? Okay, so what the animation is going to do when you actually end up batch rendering it, you do a batch render. Probably want to try to set it up in the lab if possible, because it does take a lot of your computer. To that though, it can also run overnight, and you don't need Maya open to be running a batch render. It's a separate kind of plugin that Maya automatically comes with. So when you're running the batch render, it can just be chugging through using whatever of your processor isn't being used by other programs. You can shut Maya down and still kind of be operating and doing other stuff. If you're doing really intensive modeling though, you probably don't want to be running both of them, because your modeling platform like Rhino will probably crash. But when you batch render, what's going to happen is you're going to output a whole bunch of images. So we have a 360 frame animation here. If we were to batch render this, we would be outputting 360 single images. These single images now need to be composited into a movie, and you can either do it in QuickTime or Photoshop. Have you guys talked to them about the Photoshop?
Rhino does the same thing, so we'll probably...
Okay. Okay, yeah, so you just, whatever, it outputs a whole bunch of images, and then you just open those images as an image sequence. You can change how many frames per second are coming out, and then you have your movie pretty much. One thing to consider with Maya is where you're outputting these. Right now it'll output to the default setting, which is, I'm sure, where all you guys have your stuff going. And that's going to be wherever you download it and first kind of have the install package for Maya. But if you, actually the easier way, because we're going to have to get in here anyhow, if you go up into your render settings, which you'll need to export these images, and you just go edit, change project image directory. This is pretty important. You just go through here, you assign this to wherever you want it to go. So if you have a folder you're working on, you dump it in there. And what's going to happen is when you're batch rendering, all of the images that come out while Maya is closed go into the image folder within this folder that you're setting up. So you set up this directory, and you can see there's scenes, templates, images, all this stuff. The thing that you need to worry about right now is just the images. That's where you'll find your images that you output from the batch render. So yeah, we'll get into batch rendering in a minute. We'll look at blend shaping. So everyone kind of sees about the idea of keyframing here. Because keyframing is like the crux of it. If there's any questions, like nothing else will make sense if you guys don't ask right now. Everyone's good? All right. Just the important thing, you just move the time slider to where you want the geometry to be. You highlight the geometry, you hit S. And you can add time keyframes in after the fact. So say you're scrubbing through, and you're like, actually this is really boring. I want this now to be here and that big. Now we'll set a new keyframe. Now you've got this weird transition in there. Which, I mean, this obviously looks stupid, but it actually can become pretty interesting depending on how you want to move stuff around and what the animation intent is. So the great thing about Maya, well, one of the many great things about Maya, even though no one agrees with me, is that every single thing can be keyframed. You can, yeah? Camera paths and stuff, we'll get into like cameras and stuff like that, yeah. And that's actually where we're going right now. Every single thing in Maya can be keyframed. So you can keyframe lights on and off, you can keyframe glow of material, you can keyframe intensities, perspective angles, clipping planes, every single thing. Like, remember how we looked through the attribute editor last time? And these keep getting built up and built up as you start applying Operation Sim. Every single thing with a number all the way through into the rendering editor, every single setting, everything in here can be keyframed. So at the end, your time slider, if you were to select the entire scene, might be completely red at the bottom, just with little ticks of different lights coming on at different times and sun and stuff like that. What is nice though is if you only select one piece of geometry, those will be the only keyframes that show up. So you don't have to actually deal with all of them at once, you only deal with the geometry or the camera or whatever you're dealing with will be the only thing showing up in the keyframe. So let's just, we're going to delete this. And we will, actually we'll go to blend shapes and then we'll go into camera paths and stuff. Yep.
So as you're moving through, if you were to turn things on, you can make things visible and invisible, so if you're building something, then you could show that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. We'll go through some really, there's some clever ways to do it, and there's some really dumb ways to do it. Yeah, we're going to go through kind of the dumb cheat way to do it, just because I'm guessing the geometry coming out of Rhino and all nerves will not be sympathetic to some of the more kind of intentional ways, which is fine. There's still ways around it. You just kind of have to think about like scaling stuff down. So you scale it almost to like, if you want it to be invisible, instead of actually trying to make it like to show, which is a little more complex. It seems like it'd be really easy to show geometry like that, but if you just take your geometry and you scale it, and it's like 0.001 in all the dimensions, it's going to not show up. Like we won't see it on the render, and so you just keyframe that along as you want until we can just actually go through that. So we've got this geometry, and we've got a cone. Okay, so we don't want the cone to be visible until frame 50. So here, all we will do is we will just scale this okay, and we'll set a keyframe. Don't see it, don't see it, don't see it. Say frame 50, we want to see it. Now we'll just scale this back to 1. And we'll set another keyframe. Oh, wait, sorry. I made a mistake. So what I did there is it's set up so that at 0 it's tiny. By frame 50 it's big, so it's actually kind of like growing, which could be pretty productive if you guys want to show like extrusion or something like that. Obviously you wouldn't scale in all 3 directions equally, you'd probably just scale in 1D. If you want it to remain totally disappear but you want it to appear on frame 50, you just set your time slider to 49 frame 49, and you just adjust the scale back down. So we're at frame 49. We'll just keyframe that there. So now as we move through here, no geometry, and then at frame 50 all of a sudden bang, we've got it. So it's just like, that's kind of like an instant appearance. You can similarly like have it start. So this just like, cause this tiny little dot, even though you can see that when we select it, there's something kind of there as we move through. That's not like, there's no way that you're going to be rendering out stuff at a high enough resolution that that would actually be picked up. So that will seem invisible in the scene, and then it's just as easy, you can just have it disappear, and then maybe at frame 50 it starts growing. So then at frame 100 it's in, you know, it kind of grows like it was before. But that is, and you can change how you're scaling everything and stuff like that, keyframe all of that all the way through. You know, so it's pretty simple. You know, you just use the transform tools, you move through, and you just keyframe where you want it to be. So you've got to think ahead to what action you want happening at what frame in the animation. All right, blend shapes. So blend shape is you take two topologically similar volumes, surfaces, objects, and you can actually blend between them. So if you remember at the beginning of that video, there is a cube, and that cube got all kind of weird and deformed and looked awesome. I'm going to guess that that person just took that into Mudbox, took a cube, subdivided it out, so that they start with a cube with really, really, really high face count, did all their modeling, sculpting on it, and then exported both the original cube and the deformed cube, and then all you do is you create a blend shape, which we'll do right now. Yeah?
The scaling part of the happening, you just wanted to shoot something only in the Y direction?
Yeah. No.
No, I mean if you wanted it not to scale from the middle of the geometry out both ways, you just wanted it to grow.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, you just move the pivot point.
Yeah.
And you guys know how to do that? Yeah.
Probably.
So the pivot point, to do it, all you do is you hit insert. So if you see our little modifier there, hit insert. Oh, I hit delete. So insert, and it changes to this. If you see how it's kind of being adjusted, you can just go into an orthographic view, bring the pivot point down, hit insert again, that's its new home. So now it will scale around that pivot point. So if you're doing extrusions, this is actually a really good thing. So say you have you bring your geometry in, and you've got your scale in the Y direction, because for whatever reason animating programs have a different XYZ than Rhino, but you just put that really, really low. Okay, great. So at frame 50 it's keyframed, and it's just like a flat, it could be plan more or less. And then by frame 150 you want the scale, oh, that was rotate. I have no idea. I'm sure that you can just go Google how do you move pivot point in Maya for Mac, but I don't know. So there, if you want to have your building grow in plan, or an elevation or something like that, you just move the pivot point, you scale in 1D, so you can more or less like have your plan come in. You'd be reading plan, you can have a camera path, move around, do whatever you want, and then at say frame 50 you want it to start growing so you understand it. There, perfect, you know, and then you can do any further manipulations that you want with it. Pretty straightforward and easy. Up. Okay, we'll do a blend shape. And I think we'll just do like a really dumb example of like a bouncing ball. So we've got a ball, or a sphere, we'll say. So this sphere, to make sure that it stays topologically similar, all we'll do is duplicate it. So that's in Maya, it's just Shift D. And we'll move one up. Okay, so now we have two spheres that are the same thing. Let's bring our time slider back to 0. And let's take this sphere here and deform it a little bit. So we'll just turn on control vertices. We will bring those up. Scale them in. Alright, we'll just assume that that's kind of like what our ball looks like when it hits the surface. Obviously, you'd want to spend a lot more time and do this a lot more elegantly, but this will be fine for what we're working with. So now we have this shape and this shape, but we actually haven't like deformed the topology of all. We've only just kind of changed the vertices and stuff where they are, but everything's still the same. So if we select the two of them, and then you go up here where it says polygons right now in the menu, when you're animating, you're going to want to switch this to animation menu. So just click to animation, you get a whole new set of tools up here. We can find that through the hotbox, but this is probably the easiest way for you guys to keep track of everything. And so we have our two piece objects selected, and we want to create deformer. And the only deformer we're going to go through is the blend shape deformer. So we have our two geometries selected before we open this, and if we just go apply, we're going to have a blend shape, but right now we can't really see anything, we can't do anything with it. To activate your blend shapes, you have to go into Window, Animation Editors, and then into the blend shape editor. And then you see right here we have this little guy. So say you have a scene with like 80 blend shapes. This thing's going to get pretty extensive and full of things. But what you do, this is now deforming the top one. So it's going from this first shape into the other shape. Say we want to animate this now so it looks like it's bouncing. First thing we would do, we can hide this now. We don't need this. You can't erase it, but you can hide it. And our geometry is still working. So this actually won't deform until it hits the ground. So this is the top height that we want. We have it selected. We have our time slider at 1. We hit S, keyframe, great. Now we move our slider to say frame 70, and we'll bring that down just to the point where it's kind of touching. Great. So we move it. Oh, let's be in this view. Ball's moving up and down. At frame 70, it's hitting the surface. What we want to do then is at frame 70, we'll select that. We can go into our blend shape editor and say right under here, key. So it knows at frame 70 it wants to have a blend force of 0. Key. Great. So now we'll go to frame 140, and at that point and we'll key that, and so if we change this down to like 140 frames only, we don't have the recoil, but you could imagine if you just kind of like reverse that, which is actually like the clever way to reverse it instead of actually modeling it all out and needing to re-render those images, is just take all of your files, copy them, change the order of them, like rename them as a different order, and then open that in the sequence. So then you have the actual reverse of that. But you can see how simple creating like a really dumb more or less bouncing ball would be. But I mean, obviously, think about this in terms of like your projects. What's a starting primitive that you're operating with? What's the final form that you're operating with? And what are those interesting stages in between? This provides more of an opportunity than just straight up communicating to people what your project is, but it actually gives you design opportunities. Like if that cube on that video that we watched, that was a blend shape between two things. When the pieces were really small and they got a little larger and moved into place, that was a blend shape. And I'm sure that person used blend shapes kind of as an exploration to find out what other opportunities existed within their geometry, as opposed to just straight up communicating something to people. So we'll stop this. Do people more or less grasp the concept of blend shaping? And you're not limited to only one blend shape per frame or animation. You could have 1,000 images in here and blend shape all of them. Like the most ubiquitous example of blend shaping would be an animation when people are facial expressions and talking, because the face never changes typology, they're just kind of moving little things. So they'll have giant blend shape editors, and that's how they'll make people talk, have facial expressions in an animation, whatever. But they get complex, but they're also pretty straightforward if you keep it clean or keep it kind of organized and intention before you start going. If you just start all of a sudden blend shaping everything, you'll lose track. If you do lose track of stuff, this outliner here, so if you go under Window and Outliner, it will tell you every single thing. I think we talked about this in the last tutorial, but this will show everything that you have in your scene, all lights, all cameras, all geometry, everything. And you can select on stuff and it'll bring up the attribute editor, so you can go in here. And if you notice, like, these keys are red, that means that they are associated with a keyframe, so you can actually go and kind of cross-reference and look between the two and figure out what's necessary. Okay, so blend shaping questions. Keyframing questions, everyone's still good?
Just when you were saying you can reverse the frames to make it more efficient, you do that in Maya or you do that somewhere else?
No, like you'd output that was like 140 frame animation. So you render those 140 frames and then you have 140 separate images. The reverse of those 140 images would be like the thing snapping back, right? So instead of actually taking the time and rendering another 140 images, which would probably take like a night, it's much easier to just copy those images because they come out pretty small, and you just rename them in the file. Shift the order around, organize them, just going through how it's organized by time. The inverse of the time will be the reverse order, so you just flip that around and then you have those, and then you can assimilate all those into the single movie in Premiere. There might even be a way to reverse a movie in Premiere. I'm not overly adept with the Adobe suite. I don't know, I'm sure you can Google that though and find out, but it'll be, yeah.
So which post-production are you going to use this to?
Pardon?
Like where are they going to move these frames actually?
These frames are going to be rendered out of Maya.
Oh, okay.
So I have to get through some materials and rendering in Maya and setting up cameras and stuff like that. Because, you can use other, I think Cinema 4D and I think 3ds Max can take an FBX out of Maya, Houdini can, but Rhino can't. So you can't actually export an animation out of Rhino. To that though, say you're doing some sort of exploration with blend shapes and you're just like, okay, I modeled this shape and I modeled this shape, but I really like this shape. Like, this is super compelling for whatever reason. It's just a piece of geometry. You can go through, edit, delete by type, delete history, and then you can export that geometry into Rhino. But you can't actually export an animation. Did you have a question?
Yeah, but it's really specific, so don't worry about it.
You can talk to me after if you want. Okay. Okay. So, camera paths. Which actually, before we do camera paths, let's talk about mirror cut. Let's just make another, I like polys more. Let's make another sphere. So this is going to be really important if you want to cut plans or sections. It works the best with meshes. I'm sure most of you have NURB surfaces. That's fine. All you do is there's a nice little button in Rhino, convert poly surface to mesh. Just convert it to a mesh. join it all, dump it into Maya, you have a mesh to work with. They're just lighter. So what we're going to do here is actually take your object. So just imagine this is a placeholder for your building. And we're just going to create a cut plane that we can animate through, so you can actually cut the sections like in that video that we saw earlier. And it's really pretty straightforward. So you have your geometry in here, operating now as a mesh just because it needs to be a mesh for this tool to work. And then we'll just shift and right click like we did before to bring up this toolbox. You can also add it through the hotbox, but it's easier like shift and right click because this is a context specific toolbox. So this is only the stuff that you can operate on this mesh. And we're going to go into the Multicut tool and we're going to bring up the dialog box. So to bring up dialog box again, just as a refresher, there's this little X. You just click on that and now we've got our Multicut tool over here. What we are going to do is we scroll down and we're just going to click delete faces. And we'll do it in the YZ plane. And instantly, it's cut. Now once again, this cut happens where the pivot point is, so you can change where the pivot point is if you want it to cut in different places. But you can see how easy that is. Let's just rotate over. Great, so you're cutting the geometry. So you can imagine now if this is your building with the plans and everything in here all articulated, you can actually have like a full-blown render. You can apply materials to everything in the project, glass, concrete, whatever you have, build it out, and then you just cut through it. And instead of having only 2 or 3 sections, you now have a complete animation of every single section in your project. And just like everything else in Maya, we can keyframe this. So we have it selected, and we just go S for keyframe. We will move it forward. I don't know why that thing is showing up at the top there, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Hit S again to create another keyframe. So now as you scrub through, you have an animation. And we chose, when we went through and did this, and when this dialog box is open here, you just select if you want to get back and do something different. Multicut tool brings up the options for the Multicut tool and change your plane. So we just did YZ. You can similarly do XY, which will cut it this way, and then ZX will give you your plans if you want to do a plan. And sometimes that's really nice. Instead of just having a plan always kind of orthographic, if you have a plan in a perspective view and you then cut through it, you actually can get a lot more information. To that too, you're not limited to only one cut plane. You can apply multiple cut planes, so you can have something operating through plan and section at the same time in a perspective. It's going to depend on the geometry you're working with, the complexity, what you're trying to communicate, but all those options are up for grabs for you through Maya. So we will now do camera paths. Unless there's questions. Yeah.
When you say about the materials, does that mean like we apply materials in Rhino, we bring the materials so there, or you apply materials here?
You'll have to apply materials in Maya. I'll give a quick tutorial on that. There is a ton of information online, though. There's a ton of pre-built materials, tons of information on how to make them. Really, really important right off the top, though, if you're using Mental Ray, probably your best bet is the MIA material shader. It's actually developed by Mental Ray and Autodesk for architectural materials. So it's supposed to give you like the best looking copper and glass and stuff like that. You'll need to be using lighting with it, but they're already there. You just have to kind of find a bit of a way to navigate through the presets. You guys are all, when you're rendering, are you guys using like image-based lighting, or at least physical sun and sky? If not, start. That's like objective number 1 in your next free time, because it makes all the difference in the world for a render. Okay, so getting low on time. So let's say we want to have a different camera path and we want to render it. What you need to do is you first have to create a camera. So you go up under Create, you go to Cameras, and you can create any sort of camera. I personally like Camera and Aim. What's nice about this is it gives you a target that you can manipulate, so it kind of controls where the camera's looking at, instead of needing to go through and keyframe every view. So we'll just go with camera and aim. And there we go. There's our little camera. We'll highlight that. Come on. No, I was in face mode. I was selecting just faces. I forgot to switch out of that. So yeah, so see, as I move my cursor over, I'm selecting each face. To get out of that, you just right click on the object, go back to object mode, and then I can select my camera. So this camera here, you've got a camera and then this little thing sticking out. This is the aim. So you can move this camera anywhere you'd like, and you can pick this up and move it. So we'll just aim this at the center of this sphere. Actually, spheres are really bad because they look the same from all angles. Let's make a pyramid. So say we want the camera always looking at the top of the pyramid. We'll have to go into our orthographic views to get this right. Okay, so now we have our camera always looking at the top of the pyramid. But say we actually want to see what it's looking at, because fine, that might be fine, but we're not sure. If you go into panel and you go select it, there's two ways to do this. I'll show both ways. You can go look through selected, and okay, that's the view that you're seeing through the camera. So now while you're through there, you can actually like rotate the geometry, you can pan, you can change, and if we move out, you can actually see, if you remember how low the camera was, you can see that it's actually moved up quite a bit. And if we move around, you can see how it's changing positions. Now, what we can also do is select our camera, go into the attribute editor, and you have all of the attributes of this camera now. So you can change its clipping. You guys know about clipping planes? Like if it's too small, if your near clip plane is too small, big objects won't show up. If your far clip plane is too large, small objects won't show up. What you probably want to do is just like change, working in architecture scale, change your near clip plane to like 1. And it could even stay where it is. And your far clip plane, just go and throw like 5 or 6 zeros in it when you're dealing with architecture stuff. If you import geometry and it doesn't show, because Maya, you typically work in a really, really small scale, much smaller than architecture, but if you import your building at actual dimensions, you may dump it in and you'll hit like F to frame the geometry and you'll see it for a second and it'll disappear. All that means is you have a clipping plane problem, so just select the camera that you're dealing with, go into the far clip plane, and just increase the far clip plane up to like 1,000,000 or whatever. But now if we still look through the viewport, we can change our angle of view, like the focal length, you know, all that kind of stuff. So if anyone's like adept in photography, you can kind of play with this as you like. It does change too as you just kind of move stuff around. That's probably the only thing you really need. I mean, if you guys want to get in, does anyone here know photography? Because you can change like your f-stops and ISO values, everything like that in the Maya camera, so it's actually operating towards a certain way. But we won't get into that stuff because I don't know it. So say we've got this camera, we've got all our settings right, we like the perspective on it, we think it's working pretty well, even though it's really far away. And we want to do a circular path around this. Just go in and create curves. We'll have the center of the curve on our pyramid, and we'll just move a circle around there. Now, super straightforward. All you do, you select, I think it's this, you just select the camera and the curve at the same time, and you go, is it animate? Motion paths, yeah. So you go under Animate to Motion Paths, and it's just like attach motion to path. Or sorry, attach to motion path. You can open up the dialog box. Here, you know, like you kind of determine how you want it to move along this path. So probably just, we have a circle, so you probably want to do it with the time slider, assuming that you want to, throughout the time slider, get all the way around. And play with all sorts of variables. Start end is also good. So say you want it to only go along a path for, you have a 100 frame animation, you want it to move around, like you want to do a path like this for the first 50 frames, and then you want it to stay there for the last 50 frames. All you do is you just kind of go start end, and so it'll follow that path from whatever frame that you tell it to whatever frame you tell it to stop. We'll just leave that and just hit attach. Oh, okay. What I ended up accidentally doing was I had the target selected. So if we look through our camera, I didn't have the camera selected, I had the target selected. So you can do it with both things, but if we look at how it's moving, we actually don't want that. So we'll just undo that. We'll get this back into a scale that we can work with. Bring that closer. Bring that back there. So select the camera, select the path, animate, motion paths, attach to motion path. Sorry, sometimes Maya is frustrating and it's just easier instead of going back to just start fresh, which is what I'm doing right now. So camera and aim. Let's change the scale of this, it's too big. What the heck? Sorry, I don't know what's going on, but give me a second, I'll figure this out. Actually, create, camera, and aim. Okay, I am really sorry, I don't know what's going on here. It's saying that camera, I just created a new camera, it already has an input connection. So just give me 2 seconds. I'm going to try just shutting this down and opening it up again. I don't really understand why that's happening. It should be really straightforward. Like you just select the geometry, the camera, you select the curve that you want, you just do attach to motion path. And there you go. You guys saw it working on the one thing with the target, but you want the camera actually to be operating. So where would I find Maya? Okay. While we're waiting for this to boot up, are there any questions about what we've gone over so far? Yep. Yeah.
It's a mesh.
Yeah, it's a mesh. Because can SketchUp export an OBJ? If it can export an OBJ, then you're fine. You just export an OBJ. Like whenever you're dealing with meshes, you want it to be OBJ. It'll actually probably be cleaner that way than if you were to bring it into Rhino. So, because it is a mesh and it'll understand the triangulation and stuff. But yeah, meshes are always just exported as OBJs. Triangle, or NURBs are understood as IGSs. Yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's an important question. Yeah, because there's still quite a bit of stuff to get through here. All right, let's go. Okay, we're back in business. I'm sorry about that. I know that like there's nothing more intimidating when the person teaching you this stuff can't figure it out. It's like, frick, F this, I'm over it. But anyhow, it is straightforward. I don't know what kind of weird history got associated with that. I'm sorry. So all I did was I started Maya over again, opened it up so all the defaults are there. You obviously don't want to do that if you have a whole bunch of other stuff. To that, if you do run into a problem like that, I'm up on the 4th floor. You guys can come and bother me with, like, it's super, like, if you tried everything, you tried YouTubing it, you can't figure it out, I can take a look at it, because I know how awful it is to, like, get almost all the way through your animation. I did it. Quick story. So we had to do this project, when I did this, and we had to do, like, a 500 frame animation, set everything up, keyframed everything, stuff like that, and what I had done is I'd actually animated the camera path backwards. So I was like looking the opposite direction. So the camera's moving, all the geometry's keyframed, there's like 500 things that were keyframed, everything's good to go, and then I like hit render, go home for the weekend, come back to get it for the Monday class just to put a quick thing together, and everything's just the back, it's like just black because my camera was wrong. So I sucked. No one knew how to fix the problem, like other than just start over. So I had to start over, but I know how to fix a problem like that now and like still save the rest of the animation. So if you guys do come into a situation like that, like you can come bother me. So anyhow, created a camera, aimed it, created a circle path, attached it to that path. So now you can see as you're moving around, you're panning. Now, this is not, the circle isn't centered on the pyramid, the camera, you know, like, it's not moving smoothly, but that's just a result of doing it quickly. You guys obviously can do a circular path if you'd like. You don't have to do a circular path, you can create any sort of curve. You just, you know, you come up here in curves, you can have your camera rendered or animated around that path. So you can have the geometry, and you can move geometry along a path same way, create motion path. You just select the geometry and then select the curve. Same thing as for setting up with the camera. But you could have it do this type of path. But if you keep the if you go camera and aim, and where you have it aiming is always up to the top of the pyramid, you can get this weird kind of zooming in and out. It's quick enough to scrub through and kind of see how you're working with it too. And you're not confined to deleting the path and starting over. You can just select the control points and move them once you have it going to kind of finesse the X, Y, Z coordinates of the camera as you go through.
So if you have camera set up to just looking directly at the front, can you set a path? I would imagine you can set a path to be like inside the building and then just like all this.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. That's not a problem. Sure, yeah, just because like you select the little aim thing, so if you go camera and aim, you'll just see there'll be the camera that looks like a camera and then this little kind of icon sticking out at the end. You just select that and then you just set a keyframe at any frame that you want. So if you want, you're going through a building and you want your camera looking at this wall frame 1 to 25, you keyframe that at frame 1 to 25. So the camera will still move, it'll stay focused. Then you want it to look over there, you keyframe over there for however many frames and the camera will move. You'll want to play with the transitions between that and kind of figuring out what kind of stop points in between you want to keyframe so that you get like a nice transition, because you probably don't want it to be going through and looking here and then instantly looking over there. You want it to kind of move. So you'll have to find that frame range in between there that allows that transition to happen gracefully, but it's a quick enough thing. Like keyframing is just you hit S and then you can just go and right click on it and delete as you want, change the curves and stuff like that. So that's attaching to a camera path. One last thing and then we'll talk about output. Yeah? Yeah, your snaps are all these little magnets right here. So you want to snap to grid, other geometry. I'm not sure if it's still in the Maya defaults, but I've gone through and set up my snaps to like any sort of end vertice condition to just V, and I think that's actually the case. So if you just if you're selecting vertices or edge conditions or something and you just hit V while you're moving it around, it will snap. Nice and clean. Okay, so we will get into the animation stuff. Rendering editor. There's a number of different options here. Your best bet is to render with Mental Ray. Let's not initially install. It takes a little bit longer, but it allows multiple passes. Since this isn't a rendering tutorial, we're not going to get into that. But when you really want to dump out like the high quality renders, you're going to have like many passes, like an occlusion pass, like a Gaussian pass, like all these different passes that you can end up compositing in the end. We're not going to get into that, but even still, if you want to use good lighting and you want to use good materials, you want to be in Mental Ray. But by default, Mental Ray, for whatever reason, isn't installed. So you just go into Window, Settings, Preferences, and Plugin Manager. And if this is consistent, no. You want MTL Mental Ray. Uh-oh. You've never used Mental Ray on here, have you?
I think I might have just installed the new one.
Huh, because it comes with it usually.
I've opened my one and Mental Ray wasn't there and I had to restart my app.
And you just restarted it?
Yeah, for a couple of times.
Weird. Okay, let's hope that's the problem.
Reminder there's not many calls.
Yeah, because it's usually, if you do the default,
It's probably still recording. Yep, okay. And then first, actually, I'm just going to show you something cool because I think it's pretty cool. And I don't want you guys to do this, try to do this in the next week, but I guarantee by the time you guys hit M2, some of you will be doing this. And I think that's pretty cool. So, I know Matt quickly showed that video created in Unreal last time. So I don't know if you were here, you saw it. But basically what Unreal is a game engine used to create video games. But it's starting more and more to be used also in film or architectural visualization. So this right here is a project. It's just, someone just did it's basically just a little apartment. So this was modeled in something like Maya or Rhino, and then brought in. A lot of time has been spent on this one. I didn't do it, but basically like a lot of texture work, a lot of lighting work. But basically what happens is you create the scene like this, and then I'll do it first like this. Basically you have almost render level, very good render level quality, but this is all done in real time. So I can basically just walk around this space and control it. You can also set up fly-throughs. So this is just a thing. So see, someone set up basically a pre-fly-through thing of their apartment, right? So this is also done basically in real time. Like, yeah, this part's very quick, but there's a lot of work making this look good. And then just ignore those. Those are like the cameras, but those wouldn't show in the final thing. This is Unreal Engine 4, right? So a lot of like texture work and stuff like that. And then also even cooler than that, because in the future, right? And then even cooler than that is if you want to walk around your space in like real time.
What?
So right? So you could give someone a controller, and in virtual reality they can walk around your space. This is like pushing this computer to the limit, so it doesn't look very good. But next year. And if you start searching online, you'll see there's a lot more and more videos, architectural videos being made both in Unreal, but also using kind of virtual reality stuff as well. So it's pretty cool for the future. But going way back to Photoshop, which can also be very important. Yeah, cool. All right. So instead of, obviously you can do a lot of things for this project. One kind of both useful, useful for even like a presentation on the board, or not on a physical board, but a digital presentation, would be to start animating diagrams. So just letting them play, adding text, and kind of directing kind of how people see and how people are going through kind of either the massing or the kind of logic behind your building. So I'm just going to delete all these first because this is basically done. And then okay, so what I've basically just loaded into Photoshop is in one file I have a bunch of diagrams, kind of a sequence that I created in Illustrator, and then I've just put them over each other, kind of in the same location, so it kind of makes just a little sequence. And I think I'm actually missing some in here, but that's not that important. So basically just one image on each layer. This is going to be important because when you're animating in Photoshop, all you're really doing is turning off and on layers, and then after you've got it set up that way, you kind of add some fade-ins and stuff like that. So to see this, so this is the timeline that Photoshop has. It usually isn't up by default, but if you just go to Window, Timeline, this is going to pop up at the bottom. So to get this started, let's I think my first image is this one. So if you look down here, you're going to see kind of just a little preview of what it looks like, a time frame, and then a bunch of commands like playing, kind of add new frame. So this is frame 1, and this is kind of my first image. So I'm just going to leave it like that. If I click down here, just click a second frame, I now have 2, and they're basically at the moment exactly the same. But if I click on my second one and then change what's visible in this, so let's turn off that first one, so you now see the second one. That saves by frame. So if I click back on the first one, it's the first image. Click here, it's the second setup. And I'm just going to quickly do that, so on. Whoops. Right, so I kind of have a sequence here if I go through of kind of my diagrammatic sequence. And obviously this doesn't make much sense right now because this was originally set up on the projector and I was talking through it. So here's where after you kind of set up that, here's where you'll want to kind of create this experience more of a kind of animation and rather than just like you talking about it. So I'll kind of want to add call outs or text to kind of make this more self-explanatory so someone can just watch it and see what's going on. So what happens here though, if I want to add text, basically just going to create a new layer and let's put some text on it. So oops. So I guess this first slide was me, my first set of program was addressing the plaza, the first kind of plaza that I created in front of the building. So let's address the public plaza. Obviously, you're going to want to explain it kind of as much detail as makes sense. All right, so once I've created that though, if I go to the next ones, you'll see that I didn't just create it for this slide. You created a new layer and it's just kind of by default on all the time. So kind of one thing you can do is just select all the other ones. So I just control-shifted to select them all and then turned it off for all those. And if we click back on the first one, you'll see that it's on for the first one and I've turned it off. But to make this a little more kind of motion and not just like frame, let's say I want to bring up the image first, the diagram, and then have text fade in. I'm just going to create a new slide here and then have it the first one with no text and then turn it back on for the second one. So we're still missing kind of fade-ins and stuff, but we're kind of setting up the base of this animation. So, the first slide with text, the second one, let's go. And instead of just text, this could be, more example diagrams, actual line leaders and stuff, kind of pointing to kind of what's going on if multiple things are going on in your sequence. So I don't even remember what this was. So let's go. That was the. All right, so again, I'm going to create another one so it has one without it. And then one with the text. So if I just kind of press play now, you'll see that it's going to flash super fast because they're all kind of set for 1 second. But you can change that basically in here. So no delay, which is almost basically instant, up to kind of anything you want. So let's just at the start select them all No, don't just put them all to 10 seconds and then have a minute to present. I heard that. Yeah. Well, see, even from right. So I'm not saying don't use only 6 frames. You'll see from these 6 frames, I'm actually going to create a lot more with the kind of fade-ins and stuff. So this right now, it's just going to be like, and it's going to be like basically, you'll see right here, like done. You know, and it goes through. So yes, yeah, it's not bad. Pretty good base diagrams though. Not gonna lie. So I mean, I probably want on here to, you know, if I had it up, if I had this on the screen while I was giving a digital presentation, there's a lot of stuff I would want to say about each slide. So that's the stuff I would put in text, and I would just put basic stuff. But you could even have, you know, for the same image, you know, one thing of text come up with a leader, like another one come up. So each one you're actually doing multiple things. And that's where you'll start getting, you know, a minute long from just kind of a 6 things, right? Because you want the animation to kind of replace you having to talk about it. So I would talk about these 6 frames longer than a minute if I was actually presenting it. So it would make sense that this animation is actually like telling the story completely instead of me talking about it. So, right. So kind of to add animation, actually let's add one. I added another slide here at the beginning, and let's turn them all off. Right. So it just starts at. Oops. What did I do there? Back up. Oh, I had them all selected. So I'm just adding one at the beginning, selecting it, and then I don't know why it's doing that. All right. So I think one thing I've noticed when you're doing this, it's a lot of time, try to plan out what you're doing beforehand, because I think what just happened there is when I edit the first one, it edits the ones after it as well. So you kind of want to do it, in your head, have it planned out. So when you're actually doing it, you're not going kind of back and forth in time and turning things off and on, because the way it works is if you change the first one, it will edit the ones after it. If you change the last one, it's not going to change anything. So here I have it blank, kind of my first slide. I think I got rid of one. What I just did there, I just added a new one at the end, and you can just drag them around as well. So it takes on, well, at the end it took on the properties of the one just before it, yeah. But then when I moved it, it doesn't change. So.
Oh, so you make whatever changes you want to it in that position and then place it.
That's what I did. So here, if I want it to go from blank to kind of fade in here, all I'm going to do is select the 2 I want to kind of affect, and then down here you have. I don't know if it's going to bring up what it's called, but it's basically a tween animation frames. So just like the blend shapes kind of tweened between 2, I guess that's the term. Basically making one into the other. Photoshop does that as well. So it's just going to look at the 2 frames and then blend between them, whatever difference is. So if I click on this, you're going to see tween with selections. Those are the ones I selected. Frames to add. You'll probably want to keep this or slightly higher than 5 if you want kind of a more smoother animation. And then basically it's going to tween between position, opacity, and effects. So it's kind of doing everything it's tweening between everything, so between 1 and 2. So if I click that, see it just added a bunch of frames between those first 2, and just by clicking on them you can see that it's changing the opacity between those. And it would change actually anything that's different, but because I had only changed it from off to on, it's just kind of changing the opacity there. So another tip, to kind of do this tweening at the end, because as you see, it just added a bunch of frames. So if now I was starting to mess with what's on and off, I now have to deal with, you know, way more frames in the beginning. But again, if I start playing this, obviously that first part is nice, and then I haven't kind of addressed this second part. But you know, maybe when this thing comes up, I want it to last for 5 seconds. So if I go back and watch that, it fades in. That first part comes up, and then after the 5 seconds, it goes on to the next. So I'd kind of want to do that for kind of all my steps and kind of bring up the information as I wanted. So, if I've then now created my 4-minute video full of information, to get it out, basically to save the animation, you can just go down to File, Save for Web. It's called that because typically you're going to be making a animated GIF or GIF. So again here, if I play it, you're just going to see how many frames it is. It's 20 right now, so you can kind of preview it if you want. Presets are up here. I think the kind of default is the best. Save. And once that saves out, did I not save it on my desktop? Oh, right here. Is that not working? I guess it doesn't play in. There. So now I have my image, and it's basically just like an animated GIF on my computer. Yeah, I think it just depends on what program you're using. Because I don't think, when I just opened it here, it just opened in the image viewer, and I don't think that supports animated stuff. So, but things like, I think even InDesign, you can put, so that will allow it to play Photoshop or PowerPoint and stuff support it. So if you're including it in a presentation like that, it could actually start playing automatically.
Can you embed it as well?
I think so, because you can get.
No.
No.
It's only SWF that's supported audio.
So you might actually be able to. Let's see. You might actually be able to save it frame by frame, though. Can you do that? Yeah, you can also put it on like a web page. So either links, you can link to it, stuff like that. So. I mean, so while that's pretty simple, you can, if you have nice looking diagrams, it will look really nice if you've kind of like edited that together and kind of told the whole story through kind of some nice annotation and nice kind of diagrammatic sequence. All right. Any questions about that? No? All right. So when it comes to Grasshopper, I'll show you quickly, but it's using some kind of plugins, or not, they're not even plugins, they're written scripts that I can't explain how they work, but I have them available so I can upload them. And if you do have a Grasshopper thing made and you want to kind of animate that, you can just basically cut and paste these widgets, and it will basically animate your thing. So Let me just open this quickly. Yeah, that's impressive, I know. Where did Grasshopper go? Okay. I've actually used this in the past when using Kangaroo, which is like a physics thing. So I used Kangaroo to actually create my programming for my building. So it was using springs to like pull shapes together. And actually, this was in Studio 3. So these were all my program spaces. And then based on like the strength of the pull between each other, they kind of all came together and kind of sorted itself out. So I just made a little video of it from its kind of starting position, which is just kind of them all with their connections, and then it kind of bouncing and all kind of coming together. So if you've used either it doesn't have to be Kangaroo, but basically anything in Grasshopper, you can animate the sliders. So if you have something either scaling or kind of using a slider like this example, this is just one of the other kind of examples. So here we just had this. Obviously this is not a studio project, but basically this slider right here just changes their height. So if I want to make a video of kind of this happening, it's as simple as kind of right-clicking on the slider, and you'll see an animate option. So clicking on that, you're going to be asked kind of where you want to save it, the name, which I'm just going to leave default, its resolution, how many frames you want it to be, so how many steps you want it to go through the counter. So if it was 1 to 50 and you put 100 frames, it would change it by 0.5 each time. And by doing that, you're just going to see a kind of an example. Obviously, you'd want to set it up nicely here. But by pressing OK, it's basically stepping through this thing. And you can see the slider moving right here. And you can see it changing in my perspective. And also, it's saving each of those as an image file. So you're going to have, again, just like Maya, you're going to have a big folder full of, I guess, 100 images. So that's the most basic way to do it, and I actually don't know how to get it. Okay, it's to stop. Just jam the buttons. Those are unrendered images, which is one thing, which you might want to do. So to actually get it to render, this is where some person wrote code, and you have to get that to work. But basically, you just download it and kind of plug your stuff into it, and it works. If anyone wants to do this, I can help you with it. But what I've done here is just, this is a Kangaroo script, so gravity is just moving this ball down the thing. But if I click it, right, so that's what's happening. And if I turn this on, and starting it again, you'll see that it's actually rendering it in using every single frame. So it's going, obviously there's a lot of frames here, but the ball's moving slightly in each one. And this is a really poor render, so that's why it's going so fast. But you can set it up nicely so the renders actually look good. And that's the script, just moving one frame, telling it to render, moving one frame. And again, you're going to come out with a bunch of images, which will show you, actually I can show you right now, it's kind of almost any movie program, even the default ones on your computer, can put these things together. So yeah, stopping these are the difficult part here. No, that's what the code itself is, baking it, rendering it, moving it a step, baking it, rendering it. Or it's not even, I'm not sure how it's not really baking it, but it is. It doesn't make like 100 bakes in your program though. So both QuickTime on Mac or like the Windows Media Player, which I don't think, no, not Media Player, sorry, Movie Maker. This is like the default, like my parents use this to make home video thing. But you see here I've got a folder. This is where I saved it with a bunch of images that basically go through that process. And if I just select them all and basically drag them into this, and this might be slightly different for each program, but everything can take images like this. So then I'm just going to select them all, and where did that go? Let me see. All right, each one is like 7 seconds long, so that's what we want to change here. I did it, yes, sorry, edit. Duration, so if I want one every like 1/10 of a second, just put that, I selected them all 0.1. Now you see my image when I play it. It's well, it's kind of hard to see, but it's basically making one of those frames, 10 frames a second, and you can see my image like that. Or the ball one as well. So almost even the Maya ones that you output, that's basically all you need to do to get it into the actual video. So.
So if you produce a whole bunch of images,
Yeah.
and go straight to that, and
So that I would. So what you'll see next actually is kind of like the kind of last step. So either if you have a video that you've made by stitching images together in Rhino or Maya, if it's an actual video like that, which would have like hundreds of frames, I wouldn't actually annotate that in Photoshop. I would use After Effects, which kind of works similarly, but it's actually made for that, to do that. And so the Photoshop I would really do if I just started with like a diagram with 5 frames or 10 frames or whatever, and then create an animation from those. I would do that in Photoshop. So that is the question. Ready?
So, you guys look like zombies. Our tutorial is sort of a combined one and might not fit. So unless there's any like strong objections, would you guys be okay with looking at a Rhino fly-through and After Effects tutorial on Monday? So, anybody opposed to that?
isn't this the one that's working? Can you just post it on
I'd show what the outcome is, and then show how to do it. We'll
Okay,
yeah.
We'll go through real quick
Because this is